Imagine for a moment that Legolas was not just the elegant archer who ran across the fields of Rohan, but the key to a secret so ancient that not even the elves themselves dared mention it. Imagine that, while Gimli carried centuries of dwarven pride and Aragorn struggled with the weight of a throne that was not yet his, Legolas hid within himself a truth capable of changing the destiny of them all. A truth born in the darkness of Dustervold, grown under the silent gaze of Tranduil, and revealed itself alongside a dwarf who, theoretically, should have been his enemy. What if I told you that this story isn't about heroic deeds, but about transformation, about impossible decisions, about unlikely bonds, and about the journey of a prince who never asked for his crown? Because before being the swift companion of the Fellowship of the Ring, Legolas was a son shaped by the shadow of Dol Guldur, a guardian of the living forest, and the protagonist of a friendship that rewrote history. Between elves and dwarves, the most curious thing is that behind every silent step, every well-aimed arrow, and every attentive gaze, there was an internal conflict far greater than any battle fought by Aragorn or any laugh shared with Gimli. And it is this conflict that reveals who Legolas truly was, not the perfect elf, but the link between worlds that should never have walked together. Before we continue, tell me something light-heartedly. Where are you watching this from, and what time is it? And there now, I always like to imagine this universe being rebuilt in different places at the same time. And since we're about to dive deep into this story, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any details of this journey. And leave a like if this introduction has already drawn you into Middle-earth. Let's continue. Legolas was born in a time when the ancient verdant no longer shone with the same purity. What had once been a realm of light filtered through golden. Leaves had become a territory divided between beauty and menace, as if each tree held a secret too ancient to be revealed. The prince's birth took place under this contrast, a natural cradle marked by the whisper of the treetops, but also by the silent presence of something that moved among the roots like a forbidden breath. The hidden truth behind this birth lies not only in the fact that he was Thranduil's son, but in the emotional and spiritual landscape that surrounded his arrival into the world. While the wind carried elven songs, the shadow of Dol Guldur already spread through the air, thin and poisonous like a mist one does not choose to breathe. And it was in this atmosphere permeated with tension that the prince opened his eyes for the first time, facing a world where light had to fight to exist. The oldest elves recounted that on that night, the silence of the forest was different. It wasn't the comfortable silence of a peaceful kingdom, but the tense silence of something watching. Thranduil, carrying within him the traumas inherited from Doriath, realized that the arrival of his son would not be merely a family event. It would mark the beginning of a new phase for a threatened people. The forest itself seemed to react to the prince's birth, as if recognizing in him an important piece of a journey that would still take centuries to complete. Some guards swore they felt a chill, as if invisible presences roamed the night, observing the air emerging in an era of transformation and uncertainty. For them, this was not superstition, it was perception, the same perception that would later mark Legolas himself. From a very young age, the prince grew up surrounded by two forces, the vibrant, pulsating and generous nature, and the growing darkness emanating from Dol Guldur. Not a single day of his childhood passed without him being reminded that the world around him held silent threats. The distant sounds of creatures moving among the shadows, the erratic behavior of animals, the feeling that something watched everything with hungry eyes, all of this shaped his mindset even before he learned to wield a bow. Legolas grew up understanding that decisions needed to be made carefully, that every step in the forest could mean life or death. His emotional development came not only from his father's lessons or the guardians of the court, but from the behavior of the forest itself, which seemed to whisper warnings that only he could hear. This environment forged in him a rare sensitivity. While other young elves saw the forest as home, Legolas saw it as a living organism, complex and full of hidden layers. He perceived minute changes in the air, identified variations in light between branches, distinguished natural silence from abnormal silence, that which precedes the appearance of something dangerous. It wasn't magic in the traditional sense, but perception heightened by constant contact with a threat that never fully revealed itself. This early exposure to silent fear taught him something essential. True strength is born when we understand the fragility of what we are trying to protect. As he grew older, the prince began to realize that darkness was not merely an external element of the world, but a shadow that tried to insinuate itself into the hearts of beings. The psychological impact of living between light and darkness caused him to develop an unusual empathy, an ability to see beyond the surface and understand what each creature in the forest felt. This is why so many described Legolas as someone who seemed to possess precocious wisdom. Even at a young age, he was born hearing not only words, but intentions, rhythms, and omens. It was as if the kingdom itself had shaped his perception, preparing him from his first breath for a journey of revelations, difficult choices, and truths that few would dare to face. And it is precisely at this point that his story begins to take on the weight of a legend. Not a legend created by grand deeds, but by an origin marked by the tension between two worlds, an origin that would make him not only a prince, but the living reflection of everything that Dustawald fought to preserve. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject. When the necromancer moved again, within the ruins of Dol Guldur, the entire forest seemed to hold its breath. There was no announcement, no flash, no cry, just an almost imperceptible change in the behavior of living things. The owls stopped hooting too. Soon, the deer began to avoid certain trails, and even the wind, once constant and fresh, began to move erratically, as if carrying messages that no one wanted to decipher. The Dustawald, which had once been the vibrant center of northern elven culture, began to wither from within, like wood corroded by an invisible poison. And it was in this environment that Legolas grew up, learning early on that silence can be more threatening than any roar. The older elves remembered that, before the return of the shadow, the nights were long but never heavy. There was music, there were stories, there was a sense of continuity. However, as Dol Guldur's presence intensified, routines changed. Guards began patrolling in pairs, lanterns ceased to be decorative and became essential, and even traditional feasts were shortened, as if something watched every laugh with patient resentment. This change in mentality was gradual but powerful, shaping the character of the people as much as it shaped the landscape. The psychological impact was so profound that even the wisest began to distrust their own instincts. Silent fear seeped into decisions, glances, gestures, and Legolas, still young, absorbed this atmosphere without needing anyone to explain anything to him. He realized very early on that something was wrong with the rhythm of the world. Elven children used to learn songs about animals, but Legolas learned to recognize patterns of absence, when insects were too quiet, when the water flowed too slowly, when the smell of moss seemed different. It wasn't formal training, it was survival. Living so close to darkness made his senses adjust like those of an animal that knows it's being hunted, even if it doesn't see the predator. This extreme sensitivity, which would later prove an advantage in the Fellowship of the Ring's journey, was born as a protective mechanism. Every step in the realm was a reminder that hidden truth isn't always before the eyes. but in the subtle details that reveal themselves only to those who learn to look differently. Thranduil, even while trying to maintain control of the kingdom, knew he couldn't hide the weight of the situation from his own son. The king carried within him the scars of ancient times, and Legolas learned to read these scars as part of the world around him. When he saw his father walking silently through empty corridors, he understood that this was not just the posture of a leader, but of someone trying to prevent the past from repeating itself. The inner workings of power were dark, and the responsibility of protecting an entire people made the young prince understand, very early on, the importance of perceiving danger before it happens. Therefore, Legolas developed the habit of observing more than speaking, interpreting more than reacting, calculating more than confronting. The forest taught him that impulsive decisions could cost lives, a lesson that would be forever etched in his memory. As the shadow advanced, even the animals began to change. Creatures that were once timid became aggressive, as if nature itself were being corrupted. The prince felt this transformation like few others, realizing that something greater was at work beneath the surface. The necromancer's return was not merely political or military, it was spiritual, emotional, almost psychological. And Legolas, sensitive to the slightest movement of life, felt this weight pressing upon his senses daily. The forest, which should have been a refuge, seemed to test his courage and his ability to adapt. Each day demanded absolute attention, as if at any moment reality could tear itself apart and reveal something terrible. This environment profoundly shaped his identity. With each step through the shadows, he understood that living in a grey area was not a condemnation, but an opportunity to develop a unique perception. The invisible danger made him more intuitive, more attentive, more resilient. And this silent transformation is one of the reasons why Legolas later became the figure capable of seeing far, hearing the unspeakable, and interpreting signs that others ignored. He wasn't born with supernatural talents. They were sculpted by the very suffering of the forest. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. From a very young age, Legolas realized that being Thranduil's son was not simply a matter of blood, but an inheritance that carried weight, memory, and a responsibility that few could bear without breaking. Inside, Thranduil was not just the king of Dusterwald, he was the last living echo of a destroyed era, a survivor of Doriath who silently carried the trauma of seeing his home, his history, and part of his soul crumble before the violence and ambition of much greater forces. The king's mentality had been shaped by millennia of loss, and Legolas grew up observing how this invisible past influenced every decision, every gesture, and every word, spoken or unspoken, within the underground palace. Thranduil's silence was never empty. It was the silence of one who has seen the impossible happen and knows that beauty can vanish in a breath. The discipline imposed on the young prince was not the cold discipline of a commander, but the discipline of someone who fears history repeating itself. Thranduil taught Legolas through glances, prolonged pauses, and small rituals that carried more meaning than any explanation. He led him through the dark borders of the kingdom, not to frighten him, but to show that governing meant feeling the weight of the shadow before it drew too close. Legolas learned to interpret his father's gestures as symbols, and they were in fact revelations about how to stand firm when everything around seems about to crumble. The young prince understood that his father did not show weakness out of pride, but to protect the people who still remained of the original people of Doriath. The impact of this coexistence was profound. Legolas grew up witnessing the inner workings of a reign that other elves only saw superficially. He saw firsthand how Thranduil harbored old resentments, especially the memory of destroyed relationships, broken alliances, and the constant feeling that the Sindar were doomed to lose everything they touched. It was a silent but persistent trauma, and Legolas absorbed this hidden truth as one who understands that the future depends on acknowledging the wounds of the past. This early understanding gave him a different perspective from the Elves of the West, who still celebrated golden memories. For him, survival was victory. The Sindar lineage, marked by beauty and tragedy, shaped the prince's mindset. As he walked through the halls lit by blue torches, Legolas felt he carried not only his father's name, but the echo of Thingol, Melian, and the very ruined kingdom that had once been the heart of elven culture. And though he had not lived through that past, he felt obligated to honor it through his actions, keeping alive all that could have vanished forever. His education lacked the ceremonial brilliance of the Noldor in Rivendell. It was built in layers of silence, observation, and expectation. The expectation that one day he would need to make decisions that would impact not only the present, but the continuity of the remaining people. This emotional environment, made up of memories that didn't belong to him and responsibilities that arrived too soon, caused Legolas to develop a unique sense of duty. He never saw himself as a prince by right, but as the guardian of something fragile, something that needed to be protected from oblivion. His relationship with his father taught him to see things in depth, to identify nuances, to realize that authority is not a title, but a burden. And this, more than any military training, shaped his character, preparing him to become a kind of silent leader, capable of inspiring confidence without needing to raise his voice. Thranduil's emotional distance, often interpreted as coldness, was actually an attempt to prepare his son for a world that did not forgive innocence. Legolas understood this early on. Ruling required more than bravery. It demanded prudence, an understanding of the environment, and patience in making choices. His emotional journey was, therefore, a slow and steady transformation, marked by small revelations about what it means to carry a legacy born amidst splendor, but grown amidst scars. And it is precisely this fusion between broken tradition and inherited wisdom that makes Legolas a spiritual heir of a wounded people, someone capable of feeling the past without being trapped by it. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Legolas has always carried with him a contrast that few truly perceive. To the oldest elves, he is almost a child, someone who arrived too late to witness the glories of the past, but early enough to feel the weight of the approaching shadows. To men who live and die in a few decades, he seems an ancestral figure, someone who carries in his eyes a memory that no mortal being could comprehend. This paradox accompanies every step of the prince's journey and shapes the way he sees the world. It is as if he occupies two eras at the same time, walking between the lightness of youth and the silent responsibility of eternity. When Legolas observes a leaf falling or the almost imperceptible movement of a cloud, he is not merely witnessing a simple moment in nature. He is perceiving a continuity, a line connecting yesterday, today, and what is yet to come. This perception makes his way of dealing with situations different from that of any other member of the Fellowship. For hobbits, everything is new, a different smell, a strange tree, a sky that seems larger than that of the Shire. For Legolas, every detail is part of a much larger mosaic, a kind of constant reminder that nothing is isolated in time. This way of seeing reality transforms him into someone capable of feeling genuine joy. In small things, even when the world seems about to collapse, it is the mentality of someone who has already seen beauty bloom again after periods of profound destruction. The most curious thing is that this duality doesn't cause conflict within him. On the contrary, it creates a kind of rare balance. Youth gives him enthusiasm, surprise, a desire to explore. Longevity gives him patience, clarity, an unusual ability to understand the impact of his own choices. He knows that every decision, it carries consequences that may only be perceived centuries later, and this makes him cautious without being fearful. There is a hidden truth in the way he observes the world. Legolas lives the present intensely, but always with the awareness that everything that exists is just a chapter within a much larger narrative. That is why, even when faced with scenarios that would make any warrior doubt their own courage, he never loses his capacity for wonder. There is something almost childlike in the gleam in his eyes before the living trees of Fangorn or the golden light of Lothlorien. But this enchantment does not come from ignorance. It comes from a conscious choice not to allow experience to turn into cynicism. Many older elves had already lost this capacity, worn down by centuries of loss and exile. Legolas, however, represents a point of renewal within a people accustomed to looking back. He carries the weight of tradition, but without letting it destroy his curiosity. This combination makes him a profoundly inspiring figure for mortals. Aragorn sees in him not only an ally, but a reminder that beauty still exists in the world, even in times of war. The hobbits find in Legolas a presence that welcomes them, protects them, and at the same time encourages them to notice details that would otherwise go unnoticed. And even Gimli, so resistant to elven sensitivity, gradually discovers that there is an authentic strength in that gaze that refuses to harden. Legolas' journey is not merely physical. It is an internal journey, a constant transformation between what he needs to preserve and what he needs to learn. Behind this duality lies the weight of knowing that time will never be the same for everyone. For a man, a decade is almost a lifetime. For an elf, it is merely a brief cycle. Legolas understands this deeply, and perhaps it is this understanding that allows him to forge such strong bonds with beings of such short existence. He knows that each encounter, each conversation, each friendship is a flame that can be extinguished too quickly, and therefore he cherishes each moment intensely. Eternity has taught him that the ephemeral can be precious, and this awareness keeps his heart open, vulnerable, and at the same time incredibly strong. Legolas lives in constant dialogue between what he is and what the world expects him to be. He is too young to carry the memories of the great ancient wars, but old enough to feel their echoes. He is light in his words, but dense in his gaze. He is curious like a traveler, and wise like someone who knows the consequences of time. This fusion creates a character who not only participates in history, but interprets it in a unique way, as if he were always walking between two reflections of the same reality. This duality is part of his essence and influences his attitude towards challenges. He doesn't fear the unknown because he recognizes that life, even for an elf, is made up of repeating cycles. At the same time, he doesn't allow himself to be complacent with immortality because he knows that beauty lies precisely in the fragility of the moment. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject. From a very young age, Legolas understood something that few elves truly remembered. The forest was not just a place. It was a living being, an immense organism that breathed in secret rhythms, held memories in every root, and carried silent emotions in every breath of wind. For many, this was just ancient poetry. For him, it was pure reality. The connection Legolas maintained with nature went far beyond what was taught in elven chants. It was instinctive, profound, almost ancestral, as if the very essence of the forest had chosen to speak to him in a way it no longer chose to speak to anyone else. It was the kind of hidden truth that cannot be learned. It must be awakened. As Legolas walked among the ancient tree trunks of the Dusterwald, he didn't just observe, he felt. Every change in the texture of the earth, every alteration in the wind direction, every abrupt silence in the bird song revealed something to him. It wasn't a gift of foresight, but of heightened perception, a skill that could only be born from living in a constant state of alert. The forest, deformed by the presence of Dol Guldur, whispered warnings that only someone attuned to its spirit could interpret. And Legolas, with his open mind and keen sensitivity, became the interpreter of this world that expressed itself through almost invisible signs. The animals recognized him even before seeing him. There was no fear, only respectful caution, the kind of reaction reserved for someone who understands and does not intrude. He knew when a deer was restless because of hidden predators, when birds changed their song patterns to warn of strange presences, when the air grew heavier because some unwanted force was approaching. It was as if, for Legolas, nature were a network of hidden messages, and he could decipher each one. Only the oldest elves remembered the time when this communication was common. For the younger ones, it was something almost mythological. But in him, this link flourished with rare intensity. This ability wasn't limited to the Dustavold. When Legolas left his homeland, he realized that each environment had its own spiritual signature. In Lothlorien, he walked as if treading in a waking dream, understanding the weight of the golden light that hung over the leaves. In Fangorn, he felt something even deeper, not just living trees, but ancient consciousnesses as old as the world's first songs. For many, the forest of the Ents was intimidating. For him, it was like reuniting with distant relatives whose voices had echoed through the fibers of the world for millennia. Each step he took there seemed part of a silent ritual, an exchange of energy between the visitor and the guardian. This ability to hear the living world wasn't merely contemplative, it had a direct impact. On the journey, at crucial moments, Legolas was the first to perceive changes in the weather, silent omens, and suspicious movements of creatures. It was as if nature trusted him, revealing valuable information in the wind's whispers or the forest's sudden pauses. This allowed him to make decisions with almost supernatural precision, avoiding ambushes, finding safer paths, or, on some occasions, simply calming his companions with a certainty he didn't need to explain. He didn't guess, he felt. And what's most impressive is that this connection was never accompanied by arrogance. Legolas didn't see himself as the master of nature, but as part of it. His mindset always reflected respect, humility, and gratitude. For him, living beings were not instruments. They were allies, ancient memories, and forces that sustained the balance of the world. This attitude made even difficult creatures trust him. The episode with Shadowlight, or even his interaction with the horses of Rohan, was no coincidence. Animals react to intention, and Legolas's intention was always pure, silent, transparent, like flowing water. This spiritual connection shaped his identity as much as his warrior training. He learned that true strength is born not only of muscles or weapons, but of the ability to perceive what others ignore. His sensitivity made him more than an exceptional archer. It made him a conduit between the natural and the supernatural, someone capable of understanding the oldest language of all ardor, the movement of life. While many elves retreated from the forests, seeking refuge in perfect, isolated cities, Legolas remained connected to the wild world, as if he carried within him the last living flame of this sacred relationship between elves and primordial nature. This profound connection is one of the keys to understanding why Legolas acts with such lightness, precision, and harmony in battle. He doesn't fight against the environment, he fights with it. Every leap, every silent step, every arrow fired carries the same rhythm as the movement of the breezes through the branches. There is no rupture, there is dance. There is no effort, there is synchronicity. He becomes an extension of the scenery, part of the natural flow of things, and this creates an almost magical aura around him, as if the world were always a little more alive when he is present. And it is precisely in this fusion between sensitivity and strength, between hidden magic and keen perception, that we begin to understand the depth of what Legolas truly represents within elven mythology. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject. From his earliest years, Legolas learned that in the Dustavold there was no room for distraction. The forest was magnificent, but also unpredictable, full of silences that concealed predators and shadows that watched without revealing themselves. In this hostile yet sacred environment, the prince's senses were shaped not as natural talents, but as tools for survival. He didn't train for keen perception. He needed to develop it to stay alive. This hidden truth transforms his ability into something far greater than simple elven prowess. It's a direct response to the impact of the growing darkness that threatened to engulf his home. Legolas grew up hearing the sounds of things that shouldn't make any noise at all. A branch moving against the wrong wind, an animal breathing too fast. The sudden silence of a clearing that minutes before vibrated with life. Every detail carried a meaning, and that's how he learned to interpret the world, as if he were deciphering an invisible code. His long-distance vision, often described as supernatural, was not a privilege or pure magic. It was the result of daily contact with hidden threats. From a young age, he needed to see before danger approached, identify movements that others would ignore, distinguish natural light from suspicious reflections among the trees. His eyes became instruments of analysis, always attentive to almost imperceptible changes. The silent footsteps, which so impress mortals and even some elves, also stem from this adaptation to the environment. In the Dustavold, stomping was an invitation to something awakened by the wrong curiosity. Legolas learned early on to distribute his weight, to feel the ground before touching it, to move as part of the scenery and not as an intruder. It wasn't just about physical skill, but about mindset. He understood that the forest responded to the behavior of those who walked upon it. By respecting it, it guided him. By making unnecessary noises, it betrayed him. The young prince chose to become invisible, integrating himself into the very roots that governed the rhythm of this ancient world. Tracking, a skill often attributed to the Dunedain, was also part of his daily life. In the Dustavold, tracks weren't just marks on the ground. They were stories left by creatures trying to survive in a corrupted territory. Legolas could understand when an animal's trail indicated fear, haste, or restlessness. He learned to distinguish the footprints of orcs tainted by the influence of Dol Guldur, the trails of giant spiders, and even the faint marks left by beings that avoided contact with the living. This ability would become essential when he needed to interpret the tracks left by the Uruk-hai during their pursuit of the hobbits. He didn't guess. He recognized patterns that the world had taught him to decipher. But perhaps his most impressive ability was his intuition, that almost prophetic feeling that made him warn the group even before any physical sign. This sensitivity didn't arise from abstract magic, but from constant contact with a wounded forest, where the energy seemed to pulse differently when something evil approached. Legolas spent decades observing how the behavior of birds changed before bad events, how the wind became denser when certain presences hovered over the kingdom. He learned to read the atmosphere, to interpret vibrations that others simply ignored. This perception manifested as intense premonitions, silent revelations that guided his decisions in critical moments. The impact of this extreme training is visible throughout his journey with the Fellowship. When they cross Caradhras, Legolas is the only one who walks on the snow as if he were floating, not because of physical advantage, but because he learned to move across uncertain terrain without breaking his harmony with the environment. When they are in Rohan, he is able to see for miles ahead because he grew up seeking light amidst the densest darkness. When they enter Moria, he feels the weight of the underground even before seeing the corridors. He recognizes the same kind of warped silence that hung over the edges of Dol Guldur. Every skill the world admires was built in layers as part of a silent journey of adaptation, fear, and resilience. Legolas didn't become exceptional because he was born ready, but because he grew up in a territory where life depended on the ability to perceive what no one else could. His superhuman perception is, in fact, profoundly human in origin. It was born from the instinct to survive and protect those who walked beside him. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Even without having lived through the golden days of Doriath, Legolas carries in every gesture the silent heritage of a people who walked alongside Thingol and Melian, the Maya who wove enchantments with the same naturalness with which the wind moves the leaves. This connection does not appear in formal speeches or noble symbols. It lives between the lines, in the way he observes the world, in the way he listens before speaking, in the almost ritualistic calm he demonstrates in the face of chaos. The blood of the Sindar is not just a lineage, it is a living memory, something that manifests as a nostalgia he never experienced, but which he instinctively recognizes, like someone who longs for a home he only knows through stories whispered in hushed tones. Thranduil, his father, is one of the last direct echoes of that lost era, and even though Legolas did not witness the splendor of Menegroth, he grew up hearing fragmented accounts, laden with emotion and unsettling silences, stories that were not told to impress, but to remind. These narratives had the power to shape his mindset, to make him understand that the world had been much vaster, brighter, and more united before the great ruptures. This created within him a profound perception of time, something that goes beyond elven longevity. It is the awareness that all light risks being extinguished if it is not protected with constant dedication. This ancestral responsibility, even if not directly experienced, became an invisible guide in every decision he made during his journey. The Sindar people possessed a different kind of sensitivity. They were not elves shaped by great feats of forging or political disputes, but by an intimate understanding of the world's beauty and pain. Legolas inherited this sensitivity almost intuitively. The way he is moved by the forests of Lothlorien, how he perceives the hidden sadness in the waters of the Anduin, how he recognizes the purity of the Ents without ever treating them as lesser creatures. All this reveals a bond that goes beyond historical knowledge. He feels the music of living things not as something new, but as a distant memory, something his blood recognizes even when his mind tries to understand it. Unlike the Noldor, who carry memories marked by wars, oaths, and exile, the Sindar have a visceral connection to Middle-earth, as if every stone and every root were silent witnesses to their own history. Legolas is heir to this feeling, and that is why his view of the world is so unique. When he finds ancient ruins, he sees them not only as remnants of the past, but as fragments of a legacy that needs to be honored. This profound perception makes the viewer understand that Legolas is not only fighting to defeat Sauron, he is fighting to protect the living memory of all that the Sindar have lost. With each battle, each step, each arrow fired, he carries with him not only the present, but centuries of history that cannot be erased. This connection to Doriath also explains his stance towards suffering and injustice. Even though he is young by elven standards, he demonstrates an emotional maturity born from a pain that is not his own, but which shapes him nonetheless. It is a kind of immaterial, almost spiritual inheritance that manifests itself subtly. in the respectful way he treats other races, in the absence of arrogance, in the ability to see beauty in places where others only see desolation. The hidden truth is that Legolas is not just Prince of the Dusterwald. He is, symbolically, the last breath of a culture that was destroyed, but which lives on through him. As he walks with the Fellowship of the Ring, he carries not only the present mission, he carries an entire past that echoes in his posture and his silence. This historical dimension is not explicit, but it is felt. His presence functions as an emotional bridge between what Arda was and what Arda can still be. That is why his serenity does not seem like disinterest, but rather understanding. He knows what is at stake, not only on the battlefield, but in the very essence of the world. And it is precisely this historical, almost mythical depth that makes Legolas so much more complex than he appears at first glance. He is not just a swift and elegant warrior, he is the bearer of a legacy that survived the collapse of entire kingdoms. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Legolas's fighting style was not born by chance, nor was it solely the result of natural talent. It was forged at the intersection of three completely different elven worlds, each with its own philosophy, its vision of battle, and its own hidden truth about what it means to fight and survive. This fusion created a kind of unique body language, something that cannot be compared or reproduced by any other warrior of Middle-earth. Legolas is not just fast, he is not just precise, he is the living synthesis of traditions that in isolation were already powerful, but united within him, they transformed into something almost impossible, almost mythical. The first foundation of this training comes from Mirkwood, the kingdom where he grew up and where he learned that battle is not always open warfare. In the Dusterwald, fighting meant surviving the darkness that moved among the tree trunks. It meant acting before the enemy perceived his presence. The Sylvan, Elves of the deep forest, developed combat techniques based on absolute silence, sudden disappearance, and instinctive mobility among roots and branches. Legolas learned to shoot while running, to change position faster than mortal eyes can follow, to transform the environment into an ally. The forest was his armor, his strategy, and his strength. This school taught him that victory lay in movement, not in strength, a lesson that shaped his mindset since childhood. But his training wasn't limited to what arose in the shadows of the woodland realm. In Rivendell, where the songs of the Noldor echoed through the marble halls, Legolas came into contact with a completely different form of combat: technique, discipline, and order. There, it wasn't about surviving chaos, but about mastering chaos. The Noldor fought with absolute control of their bodies, mathematical precision, and an almost ritualistic respect for the art of war. It was in this environment that Legolas honed his mastery of the bow, his unwavering focus, and his ability to read the battlefield like a chessboard where every piece matters. The influence of the Noldor is visible in how he calculates distances in fractions of a second, how he fires without hesitation, and how he maintains his balance even on unstable terrain. Rivendell gave him depth, method, and intention. The third element of this transformative journey came from Lothlorien, Galadriel's realm, where combat is almost a sacred dance. The Galadrim don't just fight with their bodies, they fight with the very energy of the environment. It's a fluid, elegant style, where each movement seems to carry a silent magic. It was there that Legolas learned to move in sync with the wind, to leap between natural platforms as if weightless, to wield two blades with a precision that seems choreographed by something greater than simple technique. In Lothlorien, he understood that fighting is not just about destruction, but about protection, a mindset that transformed his relationship with battle. He became lighter, more aware of the emotional and spiritual impact of each gesture, as if each blow carried a story. When these three schools merged within him, the result was a warrior who didn't need to announce his presence to be lethal. Legolas moved. Like a Sylvan, thought like a Noldor, and executed with the grace of a Galadrim. His ability to alternate between bow and blades with naturalness wasn't showboating. It was pure efficiency, a reflection of his capacity to adapt in real time to the backdrop of each battle. In Moria, his pinpoint accuracy prevented tragedies. In Helm's Deep, his agility maintained positions that would have been impossible for ordinary warriors. In the Pelennor fields, his reading of the chaos allowed him to react before threats fully emerged. He didn't fight only with strength, he fought with perception, with memory, with ancestral experience. This fusion made him one among many, but also unique among all. He understood the rhythm of the forest, the structure of strategy, and the value of harmony. And this rare combination meant that each battle was, for him, more than a confrontation. It was an expression, a declaration, a continuation of a lineage that refused to disappear. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject. The awakening of the Call of the West was not a dramatic moment, full of light and explosive revelations. It was subtle, almost silent, like everything that truly transforms the spirit without asking permission. Legolas had never heard the sound of seagulls before the battles on the Pelennor fields. For someone who had spent his life among ancient trees, dark rivers, and winds laden with the dense scent of moss, that piercing cry from the sky seemed out of place, almost intrusive. But it only took reaching his ears to unleash something he didn't even know existed within him. A longing that wasn't his, a memory he had never lived, a yearning so profound it seemed to spring from the very foundations of his elven soul. It was as if an invisible veil had fallen, revealing a hidden truth that had always lain dormant, waiting only for the first sign from the sea to awaken. Sea longing is no ordinary emotion. It is an ancient force, greater than desire or curiosity. For an elf, it means feeling the weight of destiny pulling at their roots, reminding them that, however much they love Middle-earth, they do not entirely belong to it. The moment he heard the cry of the seabirds, Legolas felt a fissure open within him. A division between his love for the woods, his friends, and his mission, and the sudden awareness that there was another calling, silent but inevitable. His heart, accustomed to beating in sync with the trees, felt for the first time the distant echo of waves crashing against rocks he did not yet know. The psychological impact was immediate. It was as if the landscape around him briefly lost focus, not because it was unimportant, but because a new horizon was forming within him, a horizon that could not be ignored. He realized that if he yielded to that impulse, he would abandon everything. The fight against the darkness, the bonds he had built, the very journey that was still far from over. This awareness generated an intense internal conflict, a battle that no visible enemy could fight for him. Legolas had to make a decision that would define his path, to follow the call, or to remain present in the war that would define the future of the world. He chose to stay, and that choice was not simple. Resisting the call of the sea means resisting nature itself, and that requires a kind of strength rarely seen in stories. Legolas understood that his journey was still ongoing, that his presence was necessary to maintain not only the hope of his allies, but also the emotional integrity of the group. His sensitivity, his perception, and his balance were fundamental at that moment, and he refused the temptation to follow something that seemed sweet, eternal, and irresistible. This immediate resistance reveals more about his mindset than any combat feat. It shows emotional discipline, focus, and a sense of purpose that surpasses instinctive impulses. Even so, the change had already happened. That calling opened a new layer of existence within him, as if the world had expanded from within. The sea began to live within him, not as torment, but as a persistent memory. He began to notice movements in the wind that he hadn't perceived before. He began to hear nuances in the rivers that seemed to carry messages from afar. He began to observe the sky with a new curiosity, almost like someone searching for signs. It wasn't distraction, it was transformation. He was gradually becoming someone divided between two worlds, the land that needed him and the sea that summoned him. What is most impressive is that this conflict did not destroy his harmony. On the contrary, it refined his way of seeing reality. By carrying within himself the tension between permanence and departure, Legolas became even more attentive to the ephemeral, more aware of the importance of each choice, more connected to the small details that make life worthwhile. He understood that, while he was in Middle-earth, he should live it intensely, absorbing each experience as if it were unique, as if each step were an elegant and silent farewell to a world that would no longer be his forever. This moment of spiritual awakening also brought him even closer to his companions, especially mortals. He began to observe human frailty with more empathy, realizing that their urgency, this rush to live, this strength born from the certainty of death, had value. It was something he himself was learning to feel in a new way. His heart, previously anchored only in the ancient rhythms of the Elves, began to open to impermanence, as if the sea had taught him that even eternity has its tides. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. The story of Legolas and Gimli doesn't begin cordially, nor with the kind of respect born of mutual recognition. It begins with harsh silences, distrustful glances, and the heavy memory of centuries of rivalry between their peoples. When they meet in Rivendell, the past speaks louder than any words. Sindar still bear the scars of ancient tensions with the dwarves of Nogrod, and the dwarves, in turn, still whisper about closed doors, disputes over treasures, and stories where pride and distrust mingle with truth. Legolas sees in Gimli a piece of this harsh past, and Gimli sees in Legolas the distant elegance that so many dwarves have learned to reject. But the journey transforms everything. What begins as a silent, almost childish competition ends up becoming the first step in a friendship that no one would have dared to predict. Walking side by side, traversing Moria, fleeing from whispering shadows and facing dangers that neither could face alone, Legolas begins to realize that Gimli possesses something rare, a fierce, almost instinctive loyalty that transcends any difference. And Gimli, in turn, discovers that behind the elf's lightness and precision lies a firm spirit, someone who fights not for glory, but for responsibility and truth. This realization is slow, but profound, like a change of mindset that dismantles prejudices that seemed eternal. There is a symbolic moment in this journey, a turning point that changes everything, when Gimli sees Galadriel and is touched by a beauty that no dwarf ever imagined beholding. Legolas observes this scene as one who witnesses something impossible, a son of the mountains, enchanted by the Lady of Light. And when Galadriel gifts Gimli with a strand of her hair, the elf understands that there is a gesture capable of healing wounds that ancient books could never erase. It is as if, behind the scenes of that great journey, the history of two entire peoples is being gradually rewritten by the hands of two unlikely travelers. Throughout the battles, they naturally support each other. Legolas saves Gimli with precise arrows. Gimli protects Legolas with brutal blows from his hatchet. They begin to defy war with humor, transforming chaos into camaraderie. The tally of fallen enemies, which could be a symbol of vanity, becomes a joke, a light-hearted exchange between two traditions marked by pain. And this light-heartedness strengthens something greater, The bond between them is not built solely in battles, but in silent conversations around the campfire, in the understanding that both carry broken histories and seek, in some way, to rebuild meaning amidst the collapse of the world. Over time, the rivalry completely dissolves. What remains is a deep, almost instinctive respect, and a trust that no dark force can shake. Legolas learns to value Gimli's brute strength and humor, and Gimli understands that the elf's sensitivity is not weakness. It is courage in a form he has never known. These two extremes, which once repelled each other, become complementary. And in this unlikely fusion, something is born that not even the wisest of elders could have foreseen: true friendship. Their final act together, however, is what truly marks their place in history. After Aragorn's fall and the end of the EU, Third Age, when the sea calls Legolas with the inescapable force known only to elves, he makes a decision that resonates beyond any battle. He will not leave alone. The elf builds a ship, but leaves a space reserved, not out of honor, not out of obligation, but out of affection. He invites Gimli, the friend who changed his perception of the world, to cross the sea with him. And Gimli, already old and burdened by years that dwarves rarely overcome, accepts. This moment is more than symbolic. It is the definitive breaking of any boundary between their peoples. It is the impact of two lives that dared to make choices beyond the expected. Think about the significance of this. A dwarf sailing west, something that had never happened before and would never happen again. A friendship so profound that it even breaks the unwritten laws of the world. They leave Middle-earth behind, not as elf and dwarf, but as brothers who transformed their differences into a bridge. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject. And if you've made it this far, I think you've already realized how much this journey behind Legolas reveals layers that often go unnoticed. Stories like this are built with care, detail, and that desire to see Middle-earth from angles that almost no one talks about. And if that made sense to you, maybe it's worth continuing along with me. So, if you want to keep receiving content that delves deep into this kind of revelation, consider subscribing to the channel. It's the best way to keep this connection alive and ensure you don't miss any of the next steps in this adventure. By the way, since you've made it to the end, leave a comment just so I know you've been through this whole journey with me. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always like to imagine this community spread around the world, each person experiencing this universe in their own way. And if this video has accompanied you well this far, leave a like too. It helps show that this exchange was worthwhile and that this type of conversation should continue to happen. And of course, if you want to follow along, there's a video over here that perfectly complements this topic. Click and continue with me there.